I never thought a simple text could erase a life I'd spent years building. But that morning, when my phone buzzed and I read, "Just married my coworker. You're pathetic BTW," I felt everything I believed in turn to ash. What she didn't expect was how calm I would be. My reply was one word: cool. That single word didn't close a chapter, it opened a door I didn't know I needed. It started like any other work week. Saturday morning light slipping through the blinds, the kettle on the stove whispering to itself, and the comfortable, quiet hum of a house that had been ours for 6 years. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee, scrolling through the small, ordinary things people send each other, memes, a weather alert, a link to a new song. I was waiting for Jenna to text about her flight home. She'd said the Vegas trip was for a conference. The usual stories of networking and late dinners. We'd done this before. Long work trips that ended with weird hours and tired smiles. Love makes you believe in ordinary explanations even when the scale tips. When her name lit up on my screen, I felt that casual joy. The soft expectation of hearing from the person you sleep beside. I did not expect a sentence that felt like a match thrown on a dry field. Just married my coworker. You're pathetic BTW. For a blink I thought it had to be a joke. A prank from someone who thought it would be funny. Then I saw the timestamp, the words again, and the sickening realization that my whole world had been rearranged in 5 words. My hands shook, a simple tremor that felt like the body's immediate attempt to make sense of betrayal. Heat rushed to my face, then cold settled like concrete in my chest. I could have stormed, asked questions, demanded explanations, typed 100 words and hit send with the full force of my pain. Instead, I inhaled slowly and typed one word: cool. Not an apology, not a plea, not even an accusation. Cool. The type of reply that reads like indifference and, to the person who sent it, like a mirror reflecting back whatever ugliness they'd thrown. I wanted her to feel the absence of my collapse, the refusal to be the theater for her drama. I wanted to make her understand that the thing she called pathetic was a man who would not make himself small to make her feel large again. She replied swiftly, trying to prod, to bait me into whatever spectacle she wanted. That's it? That's all you have to say? The punctuation was desperate. The message was performative. She was counting on a meltdown, on the sound of me breaking. She wanted the chaos. I stayed silent. I had learned, painfully, that anger and noise give the betrayer power, a stage to perform guilt upon, a script to follow where they remain the star. Silence, on the other hand, is a kind of ownership. It holds steady and refuses to validate the spectacle. 4 days. She tried everything: long, guilt-laden messages, drunken pleas in the small hours, confessional paragraphs that played like a cheap movie. I read them all in one sitting, then closed my phone and let the quiet do the work I wasn't willing to abuse with theatrics. In the weeks that followed, I didn't make rash decisions out of pain. I didn't shout her name into an empty house or post dirty laundry on social media. I did something that felt far nastier to someone who had thrown everything away. I reclaimed my life. I sat down with a lawyer not to fuel a courtroom drama, but to make sure the practical things, the accounts, the house, the shared assets, were handled with care so that her impulsive Vegas stunt couldn't turn into my long-term financial ruin. I changed passwords not because I wanted to cut her off as a power move, but because it was time for boundaries. I met with our mutual friends and quietly corrected a few narratives. I didn't want gossip to twist into a story that swallowed me whole. I found a therapist and let myself unpack the parts one had ignored for years. The quiet compromises that piled up like unread emails. The revenge I chose was slow, methodical, and utterly boring to anyone looking for fireworks. It was the steady work of piecing myself back together. People imagine revenge as something loud and cinematic, but the kind that actually matters is often invisible. I started running before sunrise. The kind of runs where your lungs burn and your mind has nowhere to hide from its own thoughts. I reclaimed hobbies I'd shelved for marriage's convenience, learned how to cook a dish from a country I'd never visited, and took evening classes on things that had always sounded interesting but impractical when life was busy. Friends noticed something different. They said my laugh came back quieter at first and then more often. I dated the idea of dating without rushing into it: coffee, short walks, conversations that had the soft, tentative feel of someone testing a language they once abandoned. None of these acts were intended to humiliate her. Instead, they were tiny daily decisions that reminded me of my worth outside of our marriage. There came the day she showed up at our front door 2 weeks after Vegas. Her eyes were red, Mascara stained tracks down her cheeks. And her wedding band, the ring I'd chosen, glinted as she wrung it between her fingers like she could twist time backwards. She looked smaller in person than she had in photos, as if the glamour of the trip had been an illusion stitched onto her. She begged. She said Mark left her when he realized she didn't have what he thought she did. That he lied. That she was lonely and drunk and stupid. She tried to tell me a story about regret. I listened. Listening is underappreciated. Sometimes the act of hearing someone explain themselves is a generosity that robs them of their performance and gives them back the consequence. When she finished, the house hummed with a memory of us, the coffee cup stains on the table, the bookshelf with our dog-eared novels, the simple detritus of two lives once intertwined. I said, "You called me pathetic." She looked away. "I didn't mean it. You meant it enough to destroy everything," I told her, and the words landed heavier than I expected. She wanted forgiveness right then, wanted to step back into a life of comfort without having done the work of repair. I had taught myself, painfully, that forgiveness is not a commodity you hand over to someone because they ask for it. It is earned, rebuilt brick by brick. I told her to go, gently but without wavering, and she left with a small duffel bag and a lot of regret. In the weeks after, when neighbors saw her car out front and wondered if I'd taken her back, I went about my day. I watered a plant. I returned an email. I laughed with my friend over a bad movie. The quiet ordinary nature of life was the punishment she'd never thought to expect. It was not cruelty. It was indifference turned into a kind of dignity. Word spread quietly. Some friends took her side at first, shocked at the Vegas headline she'd posted across her social channels. Others reached out to me with cautious support, their messages colored by relief that I seemed okay. That's another subtle, stinging thing about betrayal. It forces people to pick a version of you to believe. I didn't care which version they picked as long as I was moving forward. I told my story when I needed to. I withheld it when I didn't. Privacy became my armor. Months passed. She moved to another city. Gossip slowed. The internet has a half-life of interest. And her drama burned bright for a moment, then faded into the background noise I'd stopped paying attention to. There was a moment months later, a single text unlike the others, that read, "You were right. I ruined everything." It landed on my phone and, for a second, I felt that old reflex to reply, to say something that might stitch the past into some tidy closure. I didn't. I realized that closure is not a conversation. It's a state of being. You arrive at it by building a life that no longer needs an explanation. A life where your heart doesn't leap at the sound of a name. I slid the phone back into my pocket and went for a run. The road was empty at 6 in the morning, and I breathed in air that felt mine. Rebuilding was not a straight line. There were nights I sat on the couch and let the quiet crush me, the ache of what had been lost returning in waves. There were days I questioned my choices, wondering if a confrontation would have been better or if I had been cowardly in my silence. But each time, I reminded myself of the power of dignity. I had been offered a cheap, performative drama and I chose the slow work of self-respect. The house that once felt like a stage for two became a home for one in a healthier way. I kept some of her things for a while, not out of hope but because possessions need time to be sorted through. I recycled letters, donated sweaters that smelled like summer, and left photographs in a folder that I would open when I was ready. Those small acts of cleaning were not about erasure alone. They were rituals of clear air. Time, as it does, softened the sharp edges. I met people who didn't carry the weight of my past. We made new memories, small and quiet, that stitched into the spaces left by broken vows. Travel helped, not as an escape but as an expansion. I saw places I'd only read about and tasted foods I'd never cooked at home. I learned that part of healing is curiosity, about the world and about the parts of yourself that were buried under compromise. Work became a refuge and a place for new purpose. I took on projects that excited me and refused ones that felt hollow. When someone asked about the divorce, I told the truth in measured pieces. I didn't relish broadcasting pain, but I also refused to be minimized into a punchline. Looking back, that one impulsive message from Vegas was a brutal kindness. It was an unplanned wake-up call that liberated me from a marriage that had been leaking small betrayals for years. The cruelty of the text was its clarity. No more excuses. No more pretending. The calm reply, "Cool," was not a failure of feeling but a reclaiming of power. It allowed me to keep my dignity, to channel heartbreak into action, and to refuse the performance she craved. I learned the difference between punishment and self-respect, punishment looks for retribution. Self-respect builds a life that renders the betrayer irrelevant. If you find yourself reading this and you've been hurt, know that the loudest, least satisfying revenge is often the one you never enact. The person who cheats, who breaks vows, rarely deserves the drama you might imagine. What they fear, and what ultimately unravels them, is your indifference paired with your growth. Live well. Care for yourself. Take legal steps if needed. Talk to a therapist. Surround yourself with people who see your value and refuse to let you shrink. And when the moment comes to reply, you don't have to match their fire. Sometimes a single quiet word, or even no word at all, is the strongest thing you can do. That's what happened to me. The text from Vegas was a beginning, not an end. It forced me to choose myself. In the months since, I've found peace that has nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with rediscovery. The woman who once called me pathetic now contends with the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, I live a life rebuilt on clearer ground, one small decision at a time. If you ever doubt your worth in the wake of betrayal, remember this: silence can be a tool, calm can be a weapon, and rebuilding is the quietest, most effective revenge of all.